Is that these are not simple matters. It's not just a matter of reading and enforce. If that were all it was, fine, it would all be over with. But it's not simple. It's very complex and important. A lot of dynamics can be set up to intimidate the person that's trying to get away from the abuser. Sometimes the attorneys are in on that. There are ways of looking at people. Attorneys walking on people in the hallway, because I've been there and watched it and sat next to it. That, to have some compassion and understanding is very vital. It's not just another divorce case. And divorce is going to be nasty anyway. But to understand that it's a matter of power and control, and that it takes more guts than you can imagine to get out, or to try to get out. And so, what we know is people need transportation, money, housing, and childcare. Now, can you imagine trying to do all that at your child? Part of the control issue is they're not allowed to work, or they work. He gets all the money, or it goes into a joint bank account that she can't sign on. So there are a lot of factors and all happening on the wall. I just say all of that for you to know that it's a complicated, complex issue, and to, as you go through the school, pick up as much knowledge as you can about that. Awaaz looks at it from one point of view, but every cultural group needs to look at it because it's different. And people, that last thing is women get killed. Women get killed frequently. That when they leave or get a divorce, or try to get a divorce, is when they are in the greatest amount of danger. So don't ever forget that, because you could be in danger too if you're with them. We have had attorneys killed trying to protect their client. I was just looking up, but I don't know. I can't get my phone number. How many women have been killed in Bear County this year? But it's over 10. It's close to 20, actually. That's pretty scary. I think it's 22 or 22. Okay, it gets higher every year. At one point, the police department, we only had 11. That's 11 families system. So just to remember, getting out, getting divorced is the most dangerous time.
Thank you, Jenny, for that reminder of why we do what we do. Yeah, that's a pretty heavy topic, and I'm Dr. Durga Srideva. I'm a physician, an MD by training, and I've been practicing now for about 20 years in the state of Texas. I had a private practice, so I used to see all different cases, and now I work primarily at the university, seeing students as patients. And that part I do enjoy, but students also go through a lot of stressful things, and I see, unfortunately, violence being committed against each other, sometimes from other people too, against students. So I guess I'm coming at it from the angle of what does stress or violence, especially, in acute situations and chronic situations, how does it change our brain? How does it affect us? So we can ask the question of, oh my gosh, what's wrong with this person? Or we can say it, in like, what happened? What happened to cause these changes in someone, right? So we can understand it from that perspective, and we'll talk more about it.
Hi, I'm Tapasya Mishra, and I'm a co-founder of Awaaz. We have been working in this space. Awaaz, the word Awaaz means voice in the languages Hindi and Urdu, maybe in some other languages too. And so we are a nonprofit. We work with people affected by domestic violence, with men, women, children, elderly. And we focus on the South Asian populations of San Antonio. South Asian, that is India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, all those areas. Now we focus on people from those areas, but we don't turn down any client. Whoever calls us, we try to connect them to the right people. And so as you can tell, we work mostly with the immigrant community. And that's domestic violence is bad. I mean, we know it's a menace for anyone. When you are here alone, thousands of miles away from your parents, from everything familiar, you are trying to get used to a strange culture, strange country, and oftentimes a stranger, because a lot of us have had arranged marriages back in India. So, and on top of that, you're isolated, So in isolation, we all know that violence escalates. You're by yourself. Your neighbor doesn't know what's happening. Community members may or may not help. Sometimes there is a lot of, when we come from those countries, we bring a lot of good, we also bring the bad. A lot of baggage, lot of very redundant, customs, preconceived notions of many things, gender biases. We have very strict ideas of what a marriage should be, the role of a man, the role of a woman. The man usually has a full upper hand. He's even considered God sometimes, and so the woman is supposed to be the all-absorbing, self-effacing person, taking care of everyone, keeping the home together, holding the children together, and that is supposed to be her sacred duty. So there is a lot of, when a woman comes here and goes through this, there is a lot of guilt and sense of shame, and we also have a very misplaced sense of the honor and reputation. So the woman feels it's her fault, that she's not good enough, that she's unable to take care of this. It's up to her to take care of the violence that's happening to her. It's not, the onus is on her. Even she believes that. So this makes it all discouraged. And we all know that violence grows because, you get desensitized. He starts giving, and it usually starts with emotional abuse, and then it just escalates most of the time. That's a textbook case. And, he gets more and more desensitized, she gets desensitized. I shouldn't say she gets desensitized, but it's almost like, what else can she do? And there is a lot of denial about this in our communities, like in a lot of communities. So it's hard for us. It's a constant struggle. So yeah, so that's where we are.
Yeah.
And we need your help.
So I want to point out Judge Malhotra has been able to join us. She just finished up morning docket. So we already gave a little background about you. She's a friend of mine as well. So I might revert back to calling her Dimple. But we already gave a brief background about your amazing legal career. So, we're just using this time to kind of give some thoughts, some introductory thoughts. So please tell us what are your immediate thoughts about domestic violence in your practice?
Well, so as you probably have heard from Jenny, I am the presiding judge of the Specialized Domestic Violence Court in Travis County. And I know that Bexar County has at least a couple of domestic violence courts. And so I think one of the things that I see as a judge, and I'm watching, whether it's watching trials, hearing from different lawyers, is that there still is, after all of these years and decades of research and people talking about this issue and us understanding that it is a public health crisis, there is still a lack of understanding. And I think that so many of us who have been a part of the movement, people believe that everyone understands domestic violence, everyone understands the dynamics that are at play, and it's unfortunately not the case. I think there's still a tremendous responsibility on lawyers, especially those who may be representing victims, whether it's in a criminal case or in a civil case, to really educate judges juries about what may be happening in this relationship. You know, you hear about so many things even now. I mean, I hear them day in and day out in my court, these counterintuitive behaviors that victims engage in. And what does that mean? And I have defense attorneys who come in all the time and who I can hear them speaking to the state saying, well, she wants the case dismissed. She signed this piece of paper saying so. Or, you know, if you'll just call the victim, she'll tell you that she doesn't want the GPS device to remain on the defendant. And, you know, and that's why it's so important that we have these specialized courts, because usually in these courts, you would ideally want to have judges who really understand the nuances in these cases and can really, you know, make that determination of safety, what's safer for the community and for the victim in the case. Understanding that if you say you're going to call a victim, what does that mean? What kind of position is that putting that individual in? And so just, you know, understanding all of that. So that's something that we can talk about certainly at length. The other big issue for me in my court is the intersection between firearms or gun violence and domestic violence, and what we as courts and even as lawyers can do to prevent any kind of tragedy from occurring. If you look at the statistics surrounding domestic violence and homicides in any county in Texas, you will see that most of the homicides are committed by firearms. And this is with laws in place right now that provide protection for cases where the protective orders have been issued or there's been a conviction on a family violence case. So hopefully we'll discuss that more.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just take a brief moment to introduce myself. You heard a little bit about my background. Over 20 years ago, I was sitting where you are now in a classroom, attending seminars like this. And the entire time I was in law school, I had a secret that I was being abused at home. And I was doing well in school. I made good grades. I went to my jobs. I did what I needed to do. But I wanted to share that with all of you because I think it's important to put aside your biases, that we don't have a stereotype of what a victim looks like. They can be in law school. They can be in a top 10 law school. They can be your coworker. They can be your neighbor. They can be anyone in your life. And if you look at the statistics, the number of women that will experience violence in their lives, the number of men that will experience in their lives, we all will touch someone in our lives if it doesn't happen to us ourselves. So I just want you to remember that as you move into your legal careers and you are encountering clients, that you have to be aware that there's a whole person behind that interaction, that brief moment when you touch upon their lives. So that's just my message for you today. I want to take a quick moment, share the QR code. If you do want to ask any questions anonymously, they will pop up on one of the 3 computers I have set up right now, and I will put it, I will make sure to ask that question. And if you're on Zoom, feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as well. So if anyone wants to take a photo or take an image of the QR code. So I'll go ahead and jump into some discussion questions. I do want to leave time for Q&A, so this will be really short. I mean, we could talk about domestic violence for hours. Yeah. So unfortunately, we're going to have to keep it to some very tight topics. I'd like to start out because we are involved, Awaaz is involved in a very specific niche of domestic violence support, and that is the culturally specific area. And so I just want to ask anyone on the panel, this is not an assigned question, you know, what are some of the unique challenges that someone who's from an immigrant community or from other marginalized communities, what do they face when they're seeking help after experiencing violence?
Want me to start?
Well, I'm going to say, with my experience, the problem is the person, if she is brave enough to speak out to someone or try to get help, she relies for all her information, especially if she doesn't speak English. She relies for all her information on the abuse. And therefore, her chances of getting help are so minimal because every time she says, well, my neighbor did this, or she sneaks out and tries to do something and gets caught, which happens frequently. It's back to, you know, isolation is so much easier than isolating one of us. That's my experience. And one of the ladies I helped, her husband was a professor at one of the universities here in town. She had one friend who finally got her to the police department after 2 years. And they only had 30 minutes because they knew when he would be home.
Thank you, Jane. That's true. And we have so many examples like that. So I think you mentioned it, language is one, a barrier. And then another one is visa status. Like if you're not, if you're on a visitor's visa or you're not a green card holder, not a citizen, that adds another layer of complexity. Not understanding the culture here, not knowing that you could just go to a neighbor and think this is happening, you know, that because they may feel like, oh my gosh, you know, they're going to see me as other. And so I don't want to expose myself to their, whatever it may be, their pity or their scorn or their, maybe they won't care, you know. So just a lot of those, because you're completely new. If it's someone that's coming from India, like I said, you're completely new to this country and to this culture. So you're an immigrant. And Bapsi, you've got a lot more examples than I do. I've only been working with Awaaz the last few years.
Right.
So
Yeah, basically they have said it, well, you know, it's a language barrier, isolation, cultural barriers too. You know, we come with a lot of different kinds of taboos, you know, sense of what a marriage should be, preconceived notions, you know, and some traditions are good and some are not. And so we come with all that, and mostly here, you know, without anyone to advise you, sense of shame, guilt. So, and also there is a, they find a big cultural and linguistic barrier when they go to seek help,
right.
you know, in the mainstream organization. So that's where actually we come in. We become a bridge between.
Judge Malhotra, what about you? What have you had that experience of having someone from an immigrant or marginalized community come into your courtroom? And what was that like?
You know, it's different now being on the bench, but I think when I was working with the DA's office and handling cases there, or even as a staff attorney at a shelter, I think absolutely everything that all of the other panel members said rings true. I don't know if anyone mentioned this, but also just the feeling of isolation, I think that happens when you are, you know, new to this country or language is a barrier. Certainly legal services become increasingly less accessible. And also what I've heard just, you know, anecdotally from survivors is that even involving the police, I think people sometimes assume that calling 911 is an easy thing to do. It's, you know, 911, no big deal. For many people in my community, you don't air your dirty laundry, so to speak, and you certainly don't call the police. There's just it for so long in so many of our communities, those are considered family issues and you don't involve outside help. And so oftentimes we would see cases where there would be a significant amount of unreported violence. And defense attorneys would sometimes, you know, sort of latch onto that as well. Okay, you know, she never reported this. There's no photographs. There's no documentation of anything that happened in the past. Well, that's because most people who come here from different countries are very, very reluctant to involve law enforcement in any of their private or personal matters.
And let's talk about the elephant in the room. What is the experience like for someone that does decide they want to involve law enforcement and the court system? You know, do we have enough attorneys to represent these clients? This is a question I ask anyone on the panel. What's your experience?
No.
The answer is no.
No.
Yeah.
First of all, finances is an issue. You know, if they had some money, they could do several things, but they don't have money and they don't have a house to move to. So they are trapped, literally trapped. They might make overtures, but if you don't have when I worked, we worked a lot with St. Mary's Law School because we get the third-year students to help us with some stuff. We couldn't go to court, but it's, most attorneys want thousands of dollars up front because they don't like these cases. So, and then you go to, Battered Women's Shelter has some attorneys. The DA's office has attorneys, but they do basically protective orders for free. Rio Grande Legal Aid has attorneys, but their waiting list is huge because they're free. So the free resources are really, there are a lot of them in another real estate, it's sort of limited.
Right.
Because, you get out of law school, you paid a lot of money to get that degree, you pass the bar, you need some recompense for yourself, right? But the money, I cannot tell you what the big issue with money is when it comes to legal services. And it gets complicated when kids are involved, so it can go even longer.
And in our case, most of the clients need two kinds of lawyers. They also need immigration lawyers. They also need divorce or family lawyers. And most of the time, they don't have the money. And we do connect them with two pro bono lawyers, Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, TAP, Texas Advocacy Project. They have been great. Have tried to help them, but it's very seldom is it adequate. And they go to private lawyers. It's hard, too expensive. It's difficult, and most of the time the guys earn more, so they have better lawyers. So no, we don't have good. We need more lawyers.
And the numbers are daunting.
Mhm.
I mean, we're not talking 2 or 3 women a day that need help. We're easily talking, and I'm talking Bear County. We've got victim advocates in all 6 substations downtown, the Family Justice Center. There are probably 50, 60 women a day that need training. That's not going to happen. And ambivalence is a big thing. They take a step and then, well, maybe that's not good. So they'll withdraw. Okay. So here we got your protective order, or we saw this all the time. They've come to the police department, file a report, and like 3 days later, oh, I don't want to do that. Well, who knows what he said to her in that process because they're still in the same household.
Well, and to touch on what Judge Malhotra said, I would say there's oftentimes a third type of court proceeding that needs to happen. You have immigration, you have family law, and oftentimes criminal proceedings, correct? Right? If there's a firearm involved, if there's strangulation involved, these are all cases where we want to have the criminal procedure step in and make sure that someone is held accountable. Judge Malhotra, what would you say is something that, speaking to law students today, what would your message be about how they can help, with the domestic violence problem that we're facing in this country and especially in Texas?
Really educate yourself, really understand what the nuances are with these cases. They are very complex. It is unlike any, at least in the criminal realm, it is unlike any other criminal case. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we need specialized courts across all of our jurisdictions, because it really, one example that I used to give when I was picking a jury on a felony case, for example, was just explaining, if a victim was recanting or perhaps not wanting to participate in the criminal justice process. I remember trying to explain to juries that, it's, if you're assaulted by somebody on the street, just a random person, 9 times out of 10, you're going to come testify in that trial, and you're going to be very willing to tell the jury or judge about what happened to you and how you were impacted. If you are assaulted by a spouse or a partner or co-parent of a child or something like that, someone that you're in an intimate relationship with, it's very unlikely that you will want to participate in the process. And there are so many reasons for that. And so I just encourage you as law students to really educate yourself, because the reality is that no matter what kind of law you practice, whether it's family law, civil, honestly, wills and estates, it could be anything. I don't know why anybody would want to do that. It's fine. But, but regardless of what it is, you will encounter people who are in abusive relationships. And it is so important to understand what the dangers are, especially now with living in Texas and everyone having access to a firearm. You really have to educate yourself. I have cases where the state might come to an agreement with the defense and say, well, judge, we're going to enter this protective order, but we're going to allow them to exchange the children. And that is always very problematic for me because it discounts the safety issues. And so I oftentimes will say, well, I'm not comfortable with that because we have an allegation here, and I understand it's just an allegation, but we have an allegation here of some pretty severe violence. And putting them in a situation where they can communicate regarding the minor children and they can exchange the minor children is just not safe. And it's not consistent with what information we have before us. And so utilizing the resources that you have in your community, at least in Travis County, we have a facility that provides supervised exchanges where one parent drops off at the facility and they leave, and then the other person has a designated time to pick up. Or maybe supervised visits need to happen, or there needs to be restrictions on firearms. There's so many issues that need to be uncovered. You always need to have a very detailed and thorough conversation with anyone that you're representing or assisting in the legal system and find out exactly what kind of situation they're in. It will not only protect them, but will also protect you. There are so many instances where lawyers or judges or law enforcement, you hear from law enforcement that this is one of the most dangerous calls to respond to. And that is 100% true. It is really difficult to assess the risk in any of these cases, to know what is going to set someone off. And so you really have to have these really thorough conversations with your clients to understand exactly where they're at.
And
sorry.
I just wanted to add to that a little bit from the psychiatric, what's happening with their mental health at that time, especially during this crisis mode. Most of the survivors are in flight or fight in a shock
Or freeze.
They're frozen, yes. And so their prefrontal cortices they're not engaged with what really thinking through maybe what the best course of action may be, because over a certain period of time they've been telling themselves, because the person who was victimizing them, the abuser, has been giving them the message that they're not worth anything, that they're, just subpar human beings. So they may come to you in a state where they're completely self-effacing, and they may not tell you the extent of the problem. They may be not comfortable sharing their experiences. So I think it's like Judge Malhotra said, it's really important. Like, in order for people to share how they're feeling, what's going on with them, they need to feel comfortable. They need to feel that they can trust you and that a relationship can be built. And if they're continuously like just trying to gauge and see, oh my gosh, can I trust this person or not? Do I tell them? Do I not tell them? Are they judging me? If they're in that state, then they're not going to be able to divulge the information that you're going to need.
Yeah, and I'll touch a little bit. I'll share a story. It's not my story. It's a friend of mine that actually sought services from Asian Family Support Services of Austin in Travis County. She went to the protective order hearing with an attorney. She was prepared. What we were surprised to find out is when we arrived, the abuser, she came from an Asian family in Houston. She's American born, but very traditional family. Her mother was also abusive to her as a child. And what the abuser did was fly in her mother to testify against her at the protective order hearing. So imagine if you were on the bench or even an attorney involved in this proceeding, very unusual. And those are the times where it's really important to be educated about the whole person and their identity. And if there are cultural issues, if there are family issues, to be aware, because unfortunately in that situation, the judge said that part of her decision relied on the fact that the mother was there and that she had never seen that in her entire career on the bench. And in her mind, she said this, now it seems more like a he said, she said, because I've never seen a mother testify against their own daughter.
Right.
Which, you know, I agree, it's shocking, but it happened. I was there. I saw it happen in court. So, you know, those are the times you have to put aside what you think would have been the best course of action, what you think is right or wrong, because in this person's world, it may be completely upside down and you have no idea. So I do want to bring up a question. I know we've talked a little bit about children. There's a question from the audience, you know, if a victim decides to report and there are children involved, what is the danger of their children being taken away, CPS getting involved? You know, what has been your experience?
Well, my experience was, we always feared that. The children would be taken away. However, a lot of training has been done with CPS child services, so that doesn't continue to happen. It does continue to happen, but it's not as likely as it used to be because of all the new hires are required to do something else. And also speaking about the children and the effects of the children, you know, sometimes it's hard to decide what to do, but once the children are taken away, well, why not stay with the guy and get my kids back? You know, but for them to understand that you're going to have to do a lot of things before you will get your children. It's not good for them necessarily or good for the children, but it's very violent. And I'd say somebody's going to pay for this. You don't want them dead.
Yeah.
It's a hard call.
So we, when a client comes to us, we are required to tell them right away that, you know, if you say anything about the child, if a child is involved in any way in that violent, you know, in that whatever is going on, we have to report that. Not what you tell us, but you know, if it's a child, if the child is getting abused, and there are many cases where they just don't come back after that. So that's and I feel very bad about it because they needed us, but we do have to tell them that.
I have seen cases where when given the choice, when given the option, the woman will leave the violent situation with her child and go to a shelter so that the children are not taken away from the woman. And that can also happen.
That happens frequently. If it's him or my kids, it's most of them, not always.
Have you seen situations where the survivor is brought up on criminal charges because there was violence involving a child?
Yes.
So that is one of the dangers
Yes.
that you face if you report as a survivor. Again, these are all to help you to help explain the specific challenges faced by a survivor.
And what happens is sometimes survivors or victims do engage in violence, and that may happen over the course of years, where initially they weren't violent, they weren't explosive kind of people, but enough time in a pressure cooker in that high pressure situation, when you feel like you don't have a way out, everyone lashes out, and sometimes the innocent children are affected. And The difference between the perpetrator and the victim, though, is that once there's an opportunity for change to happen, like if someone says, well, you know, we can help you here and then you can take care of your child and both. The victim and survivor often changes their behavior. Like if they've lashed out of frustration or something like that against their children in the past, they have this opportunity to change, and oftentimes that change does manifest in the survivors and the victims, whereas with the perpetrators, they will not even agree that they've done something wrong. In their minds, it was their right. Oftentimes I've heard them say, oh, it's because I love them that I feel this way.
Or if she knows, if she said such and such, then I'm going to.
Yeah, she knows, she provoked me. It was her fault.
That case I shared with you, that's what the mother said on the stand. Well, if he hit her, it's probably because she deserved it. She's always been a rebellious child. And, you know, what are your thoughts, Judge Malhotra? Have you seen these kinds of issues come up in your courtroom?
Oh, yeah, several times. I mean, I think there's different facets to it. One thing is, you know, obviously when people report domestic violence, and if there are minor children in the home, law enforcement clearly has a duty to, or a mandate to report to CPS, which has the effect of silencing victims and dissuading them from calling law enforcement, which they were already reluctant to do in the first place. And then once CPS gets involved, you have unfortunately so much turnover in that system that it is really hard to keep people who understand domestic violence, who are, I guess, you know, experienced enough, not only professionally, but personally to know what the dynamic is with the family that's in front of them. And then the other part of this really is that abusers will use children to further manipulate and abuse the victim. And that's really, you know, one of the most, I would say, probably traumatizing forms of abuse for a parent. And because oftentimes I remember when I worked as a staff attorney that, you know, people would say, or women would say, he never even was an involved parent. He never really cared about the kids. And all of a sudden he's fighting me, you know, using all his money to hire lawyers and to fight me for everything in court. And because that's, remember, when we're talking about domestic violence, you have to understand everything is about power and control. And when one parent decides, I'm leaving, I'm out of here, I've had enough of the abuse, what is the only other way to control that person? It's through the legal system and using the children. And so, you know, it's a shame that I think CPS is getting better, but certainly we, you know, systemically, there's still issues with being trauma informed, you know, speaking to victims in a trauma informed manner, providing services in a trauma informed manner. You know, one of the scenario that you, or the example that you gave, Jenny, I think you were talking about someone who testified, and again, really having judges who understand, or lawyers who understand what is happening here. One thing that we used to do in criminal cases routinely was we started having expert witnesses testify, and that can happen in civil cases as well. And that goes back to my original statement of don't assume that people understand domestic violence. Assume that they do not. It is okay to overeducate. And expert witnesses are fantastic in any case because they're able to really hone in on the issue that's happening here. If there were an expert issue in that case, they would have said, you know what, it's very common, especially in cultures where domestic violence is seen as a private issue, it's taboo, it's something that's not discussed. It's common when, if a woman says, you know, and I'll just use my culture, for example, it's still taboo to be divorced, to leave a marriage. And so there are situations where the parents of the victim would not be supportive of their daughter leaving. And so they may, in a criminal case or a civil case, testify in a way that is opposite from what you might think they should do. And so it's important to just understand why that's happening, and utilizing expert witnesses and caseworkers, social workers to explain that to judges or juries is extremely helpful.
So this time flew by. We have about 2-3 minutes left. I do want to encourage everyone who's attending either virtually or here in person to stay informed. We are here in Bexar County. I have brochures here that if you'd like, you can take one. We'd love to stay in touch as you progress through law school and into your legal careers. I've talked with Melody about hopefully at some point, in the near future, setting up a clinic here for law students to be able to help with domestic violence cases. I did that myself in New York, serving as an advocate for protective order hearings. It's an amazing experience, but I do want to end with a question. I'm a big believer in systems advocacy as well, right? Working pro bono, you're still working within the system as it is, but if I could get some closing thoughts about, for these law students, what are things that they could advocate for to help make the system more accessible and open and transparent for survivors? So I'll start with the panel here in person and then end it with Judge Malhotra. Go ahead.
Well.
I know it's a big question. You have 1 minute. Sorry.
Well, I think you have to. Actually, what was on my mind is one of the things you need to do is to know there are resources in the community to get help from, to refer them to. There are brochures that you put down, the police department, the city has brochure, they call it safety plans. Things that you can hand people to look for common sense, simple things to do. Like if you want to get in the fight, stay out of the kitchen, so you don't get stabbed. It's just those kinds of, to get a protective order. So that some simple things you can just click off like that. To say you make no false promises. You cannot tell people everything will be okay because you don't have that, but it's some hopeless. And for systems, I don't know how you change the whole system. We're trying just to get some firearm minimal changes. It's before the Supreme Court now to take away what we do have. So I have no idea.
Are you talking about what the lawyers should be doing? What they
what can they advocate for to make the system better? If there's a law in mind or yeah.
So become a real advocate for the person who comes to you, because she is, I think, especially I'm talking from the immigrant point of view. She's looking for, she's most of the time isolated, has very limited resources. It's try to understand her culture and listen actively to her. She shouldn't think that, okay, this person is just somebody who I'll give the money and get the work done. You can actually create some sort of, I know that, it's with you guys, it's time is money, so that's going to be maybe a little difficult, but you can find your own way to actually connect. And I have seen that, the difference it has made in the lives of some of the clients when they have actually really liked it. And so you just have to find that, understand their culture. And again, I'm talking from an immigrant point of view. If immigrant comes to something, please know that she is looking at you for more than just legal stuff.
Yeah, and like Judge Malhotra also said, educate yourself, right? So educate yourself not only from the cultural and the immigrant perspective, but maybe also a little bit about what trauma does to people. How does trauma impact you as a person? And then how do we behave when we've gone through trauma? Like maybe we're not as assertive. Maybe we're more, we don't want to ask for help and we don't know how to ask for help. All of those things. So just to really to open up your minds and your hearts to think about things differently than you normally would, just with your lawyer brain, right? Like you go through school and you learn things a certain way, but now you have to learn to really look at the person in front of you as a whole person, not just a legal case that's in front of you. And I had to do that when I was going through med school and psychiatry and residency training and all of that, right? Like I had to think of this person not as a patient that's interrupting my sleep at 2:30 in the morning, but as a real live human being that's experiencing issues that I need to be there for.
I know we're a little bit past the hour.
Sorry.
I'll just let Judge Malhotra share her thoughts and then. Go ahead.
All right. Well, no, I mean, I would echo everything that the other panel members said. One thing I'll say to you students is I'm not naive enough to think that all of you are going to, graduate and want to just devote your life to nonprofit domestic violence work or something like that. And that's okay. You can still be a part of this movement. And I think we have an obligation to do that. The CDC has said that this is a public health crisis. Everyone, and I guarantee you, everyone knows someone who is affected by this issue in some way, whether it's adults or children, families, whether it's now or in your future. And so if you are going to be practicing in some other area of the law and you're successful, and I wish that for all of you, please remember to take pro bono cases. We do not have enough civil attorneys who are there to provide low cost or free legal services. And trust me, legal aid is just not an option. They are so overworked and their hands are full. And I know all of us probably have a similar experience on the panel of trying to find legal help for someone and coming up against a wall over and over and over again. So please remember that I truly believe as a society, we have an obligation to provide some service to those who are affected by this very, very, very damaging issue. And so that's my hope. And then also we need help with the firearms issue just because of what's happening in Texas. And so, I don't think we can change the whole system, but you can certainly, do your part in helping alleviate some of the dangers for people who are trying to escape these situations.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I hope they were helpful. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dimple. I'll see you later. Okay.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.